Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Intuitive Angling. And man, I really appreciate you guys making some time out of your day to hang with me a little bit and check the video out. I always appreciate that. And guys, today we're going to be talking about how to never get fooled from a bass as far as being able to detect a strike every single time. I think a lot of people, I get a lot of questions. People say, well, how do I detect a strike? Or how do I know that I'm getting a strike? Or how do I know, if it's a rock or a stick or something like that? I'm going to give you guys a lot of good juice on here so you'll just never get fooled again when you're out there fishing. Also, guys, just a quick reminder, Tackle Warehouse has still got their 4th of July sale going on, 15% off everything on the website or on the site there. And it only goes on until the 10th of July. So if you guys are interested in getting some tackle, you can get everything at 15% off now. And I'll put my Tackle Warehouse link in the description of this video. If you guys use that link, it's a good way to support the channel here. So I really appreciate that. Okay guys, I think one of the big things about bass fishing in general, even pros, that a lot of pros still get fooled as far as they don't really know what a strike is. And you hear the old saying, people say, well, it doesn't cost anything to set the hook. But there's some things you can do to not ever get fooled where you just know exactly when a fish is gonna hit. So I sort of wanna go over the different scenarios of what a bite feels like and what a fish does, when they actually strike a lure. The first thing I want to break one big myth. I think one of the biggest myths in bass fishing is that people say, well, you got to be a line watcher so you can detect a strike. You got to use braided line, braid to fluorocarbon because it's more sensitive and you can detect a strike. And it's that people think that there's this urgency to set the hook and you got to detect a strike immediately and set the hook. That is a bunch of BS, guys. That's a total bunch of BS because, in my opinion, most anglers set the hook way too prematurely, and that's why they lose a lot of fish. That's why they get bites and lose them. That's why they lose a fish halfway to the boat, because here's the reality of the situation. 98% of the time, now I will grant a 2% of the time where it's an abnormality with this, but 98% of the time, you're not, if it's a decent fish, like if it's a bass that's 1.5 pounds or 2 pounds, you're not going to be able to, that fish is going to swim 15, 20, 30, 40 feet before it either swallows the bait or spits it out. We've all seen videos where you got these bass that come down and they hit a lure and they just flare their gills, then they blow it right back out, just like that. You're not going to catch those fish anyway. That's a freak situation. Most bass, what they do is when they bite a lure, especially a slow lure, they just start swimming out with it. And they'll go forever, and you can sometimes shake it off if you don't have a hook. But a lot of times what happens, if you just let a fish swim with it forever, the fish winds up swallowing it. So there's a balance there between how long you have to let a fish run with a lure and how you need to set the hook. The first thing I want to do is tell you this, as far as there's two different categories of strike detections. You got your moving baits, like your crankbaits and your spinner baits, and then you got your slow baits, like your jigs and your worms. The strike is going to be different as far as how it feels on both of those. So we're going to talk a little bit about both of it. Now, when you're fishing a slow bait, say you're working a jig or a shaky head or a worm or something like that, Ned rig, there's a couple different ways the fish are going to hit it. First of all, it's like if you're hopping the lure off the bottom and you're hopping it, anything over like a foot off the bottom, sometimes when you hop that lure off the bottom and the lure's falling back down, the strike that you'll see, the only strike that you see is your line ticks like that. And that means the fish, as that lure falls down, the fish has flared its gills and it's inhaled that lure, causing that line to tick. And the other time is when that lure is on the bottom and they actually pick the lure up off the bottom, either with their mouth or they flare their gills, and they either hold it or they start swimming with it. Now, the problem people have with strike detections, it's not when you get the line tick or it's not when the fish starts swimming out with it, is when that bass bites that lure on the bottom and just sits there with it in its mouth, and they do that quite a bit. So here's what you need to do. Say you're out there fishing and you're working along there, you're working your jig or worm, and all of a sudden something doesn't feel right. It's like it gets mushy or you lose contact with the bottom, something's not right. That is usually when people don't know if they've got a strike or not. And that's usually when a lot of people set the hook and nothing's there, or they set the hook and they've got a fish. Here's what you need to do so you won't ever get fooled. If you're fishing there and you get your line tick, I'm going to run through the 3 different deals with a slow bait. If you're sitting there and you got your line tick like that, don't set the hook when you see that line tick. When you see that line tick, take up the slack in the line and feel if you feel any resistance or any movement. If you feel any movement or resistance, set the hook. If you're fishing along there and you feel something mushy and soft, but it's like nothing's moving, it feels like the bait gets lifted off the bottom, or you lose contact with the bottom, but you're sitting there, it's like, man, that feels like a bite, but I'm not sure. Don't set the hook. All you have to do is put some tension on the line, just put a little bit of tension and pull back. And if it's a fish, it'll either start moving a little bit or you'll feel some type of pulsation on it. And then you know it's for sure a fish. And then again, if your line just starts moving out like that, that's pretty obviously, you know, you got a strike and you can set the hook. But I think the biggest problem people have with a slow bait is they think that they've got to set the hook like a live nerve ending or that fish is going to spit it out. They're not going to spit it out. 98% of the time, guys, you got plenty of time. And they're not going to swallow it, usually unless they go a long distance. Now, sometimes the mood and the personality of bass, they'll take a slow bait and they'll just inhale it, especially if they're super aggressive. But most of the time, if you have the rule of thumb, if you let them swim anywhere between, say, 5 to 10 feet with it, and 5 to 10 feet is not that much, and then you set the hook, most of the time, 98% of the time, they're not going to swallow it, and you're going to get a good hook set. But don't feel like you've got to oh, there's one, I better set the hook or I'm going to miss it. Or it's like, if I don't set the hook, he's going to spit it out. Big myth in bass fishing. Here's the best thing to do. It's like, you throw out there, you're working your bait along the bottom like that. Okay, I'm pretty sure that's a strike. And then you lift up on it and your line starts moving out and you go, okay, I know that's a strike. At that point, don't get all excited. You still got plenty of time. It's like, you know, you got one on there, let the fish swim a little bit with it, tighten the line on it and just pull back and start reeling like that. Then you're not going to miss hardly any fish. Now that's with a slow bait. A moving bait bite is a little bit different. There's a couple different strikes with that. If you're fishing any type of a moving bait, like a chatterbait or a spinnerbait or a crankbait, something along those lines, there's a couple different ways the fish hit it. Most of the time when you're reeling like that, sometimes they hit it, boom, and you know it's a fish. There's no doubt. It's like you're reeling, it's like, bam, they hit it like that. You know there's a fish there. The other type of strike that you get on it is you're reeling something like that, and all of a sudden, you lose contact with the bait. It's like you're reeling and all of a sudden it's like somebody feels like they cut your line. And what happens there, a fish has come up from behind that bait and is moving forward with it and it's pushing that bait forward, so you lose contact. And the other strike that you have is you're reeling it, you know, through the water column like that, and all of a sudden it just gets mushy, but you don't really feel anything. And that's because that fish is moving at the same pace that you're reeling that lure, and they've got it too. So regardless of the situation, if you're throwing out there and you're reeling your crankbait in and one slams it, or if you're reeling your chatterbait through there and all of a sudden it feels like your line got cut off and you lose contact, or if you're reeling, you know, your bait through there and all of a sudden it just feels heavy, something like that, again, don't be a live nerve ending. Don't just like set the hook hard. If whatever you're reeling like that and you get a bite, keep reeling until you feel the fish. And once you feel that fish, reel real fast like that and pull your rod back. But you don't want to set that hook until you feel that fish. And this is more difficult to do on a moving bait because there's an instinct that we have in it. It's like you set the hook when you feel a strike. That's almost like you can't fight it. There's like, I get woken up all the time in my dreams, guys, that I'm getting a bite and I set the hook and I'll wake myself up. And that's what you have to avoid. And the only way that you can do that with a slow bait is you got to anticipate a strike every time. Now this is really important with like a chatterbait, because a chatterbait is notorious for this, that they hit it real mushy. So when you throw that spinnerbait, crankbait, chatterbait out there, expect a strike. You're expecting a strike every single cast. And when you get that strike, you know, it's hard to do, but you're throwing it out there, boom, one hits it. Hesitate for like a second or two before you set the hook and start reeling and pull it into it. And just that hesitation of a second or two is going to make a big difference about those fish getting one barb in them with a treble hook, or getting all of the barbs in it, or getting that fish to hit the hook right at the lip, the skin part of the mouth with like a chatterbait, or getting it back in the roof of the mouth, that split second. So point of the video, guys, is do not get in a hurry to set the hook. Fish are not going to spit it out. That's a big myth in fishing. You got plenty of time to take care of it, and it'll just add up to land a lot more fish if you do that. So hope it helps out. Talk later.